Hello, you lovely listeners. I'm Amy. Welcome to the Really Good Conversations podcast, where we will delve into the minds of the business people we have met in the process of launching our first card game. We will be uncovering their secrets to success, their biggest mistakes, and sharing the key lessons they have picked up en route. So, if you're looking for an engaging chinwag mixed with business insights and a good pinch of fun, you're in the right place. Let's have a really good conversation. Welcome to the Really Good Conversations podcast. Today I am joined by Bettina Arndt, who trained as a clinical psychologist in the 70s before becoming one of Australia's first sex therapists. She later evolved into a respected social commentator, and over the years her focus has shifted to gender issues, advocating for men's rights, and her content on YouTube and Substack has attracted millions of views. Welcome to the podcast, Bettina.
Great pleasure to be here, Amy. Thank you for having me.
Really looking forward to this conversation because, gosh, you have certainly had a varied career that has spanned several decades, really probably much more than any of the other guests I have had on this podcast today, and quite a diverse and evolving career and path. So you obviously evolved from that space of clinical psychology to broader social issues and discussions along the way. And particularly, there's a lot of topics I think we could discuss from the work that you do. But today I am particularly keen to delve into the topic of taboo conversations and explore a little bit more about what's been that driving force in your career on these topics and why society deems them uncomfortable. Because I think that in itself is an interesting topic of discussion. So firstly, take us back to the 70s when you trained as a clinical psychologist, and what inspired you to go down the path of becoming a renowned sex therapist?
Well, I was very lucky, actually, because when I was being trained, I was working at a clinic which was actually run. One of the teachers was a guy who became interested in the new sex research, which was being published at that time. There were famous American sex researchers called Masters and Johnson, who they did some initial work on, how our bodies work and what the sexual response is all about. But then they went on to look at how do we fix the problems? What do we do about men not getting erections or women not having orgasm or whatever it was? And this research had just been published and he wanted to have a go at that. It was all brand new, really exciting. And so he announced that at our clinic we would see sexual problems. And I think every doctor in Sydney heaved a great sigh of relief and started sending all their people to us. So my training became very distorted because we had a clinic which was supposed to be a general psychology clinic, but we were inundated with sexual problems. Oh. And it was so exciting and really fascinating, trying out some of these new ideas. I did my research on teaching women to reach orgasm, and I advertised for women who felt they weren't achieving enough sexual satisfaction. Ended up with 90 women over a period of 6 months that I sat talking to, women of all ages. And I just loved it and decided I wanted to work in this brand new field. And that's how it all began. It was very much something that it seemed to come very naturally to me to enjoy this territory. And also during that time when I was doing that research, I realized how ignorant people were and this craziness. This is part of normal life. And we should know about how our bodies worked. And yet this was an area that then was really taboo. You weren't allowed to talk about this. You certainly weren't allowed to talk about this stuff in public. And I thought, that's crazy. Instead of sitting here with one woman after another saying, this is what where your clitoris is, to get on television and show them would be such a fantastic thing. Put up, not in real life, of course. Yeah. But just pictures, doing education. And that was the idea. Just get out there and show people this was something we can talk about. And wow. I determined that's what I wanted to do. And I was really lucky because I ended up working for this little magazine, an adult sex education magazine called Forum. And I was originally a consultant and eventually became editor and owner, publisher of that magazine. We did that for 10 years. It was just amazing. I spent my life talking about sex on television and radio, and teaching doctors and teaching professionals across Australia about sexual counselling. And it was just amazing because I was very young, and which was a real advantage. You can't be a dirty old man in a raincoat if you're a nice, well-educated young woman. And I had a master's degree. I was well qualified, such as the qualifications were in those days. So I got away with doing things that a lot of other, certainly professional men wouldn't be able to do in terms of talking publicly about sex.
That is fantastic, because I'm trying to cast my mind back to the 70s, which obviously was before I was born. But even thinking today, a lot of people would struggle to have conversations perhaps in that space about their sexual activity or wellness. So to think back then, really, people want to have that almost it would have been deemed a bit of courage to come and see a sex therapist then, and they wouldn't want to be telling anyone about it and stuff. So, you were really pioneering, shall we say, that, flying the flag for it.
And it was I can't begin to tell you how little we knew. I mean, the classic was this phone call I got from a nurse who was working in one of our big hospitals, and she rang up and said, I'm in a spinal ward full of young men with spinal injuries, and they're all saying to me, will I ever get an erection again? And she, didn't know anything about it. She asked all the doctors. No one would talk to these guys. No one knew anything. There was no research. No one had even looked at this area. And I was really lucky because I was traveling. Part of my job involved going overseas, buying books. We had a thriving bookshop of sex education material, and I met all sorts of famous researchers, people who were starting to do this sort of work, and I could come back. I said, I'll try to find out for you. And I came back and sent the nurse various things that I'd found. And I mean, we were on the cutting edge of a whole brand new area of research and knowledge, and it was incredibly exciting.
That is amazing. And how do you think your experiences as a sex therapist influence your views on relationships?
Well, it was interesting because my initial work was aimed at women, and I was interested. I was a young feminist. I wanted to help women. That was one of my goals in terms of my work. And I thought, if you're going to do something for women, the bedroom is a good place to start. Because a lot of women certainly weren't enjoying their love lives as much as they should have, be able to, and they just didn't have the information, and they weren't taught to express their own needs and so on. That's where I started, but what became immediately obvious is men wanted to talk to me, and everywhere I went, not only did women bail me up in the corner telling me all about their problems, but men did too. And I started to listen to men, and that was the turning point for me, because if men will talk to you about their erection problems, they'll talk to you about anything. And then also talk about the fact that they hadn't seen their children for 10 years due to family court battles, or, the real issues in their lives. And so, I had these 10 years focusing mainly on sex. And then for various complicated reasons, I moved out. I was working for our big newspapers and magazines writing about broader social issues. And it was men that, what really struck me was that at that time, the whole public narrative was dominated by women. I mean, I was initially part of that. The women's movement, that also was brand new territory, this, absolute excitement about what women can achieve in their lives and opening up new opportunities for women. But it meant that when it came to articles in the paper or stories on television, whatever it was, everything was dominated by women's needs and women's wants, and almost everything was written by women, and it was women talking about these relationship issues, and when men never got a look in. And I thought, this is crazy. We're talking about relationships. We have to talk about both sides of this equation. Yes. So I would go out there, whatever the issue was that was being discussed, I would tend to do women say this, but men say this. This is what men think. And I gradually, I suppose, built up an audience of people who were men and women who were saying it was good to hear what was going on the other side of the fence, what men felt about these issues and representing men's point of view. And the more I did it, the more I became convinced that this was really important. It just, and you're talking about this area of taboo topics. I mean, I do have an attraction towards unmentionable topics, and it made me hopping mad. This assumption that this is women's turn, and we don't have to ask men what they think, because it's much more important that we open up opportunities for women. Well, bugger that. I mean, we need to live in a world where men and women are treated fairly. That's why I became a feminist. I wanted a level playing field and open up opportunities for women when they didn't have them. But I felt actually by that time, this was by the 1980s into the 1990s, women had achieved a lot of those basic goals that had been set for them, I suppose, by the second wave feminists in the 1970s. And it was becoming ridiculous how many areas it was men and boys who were falling behind, and no one was prepared to talk about it. And that was not the feminism I was striving for. I wanted fair treatment for all.
Yeah, gosh. And have you always been an outspoken person? And was there a particular moment that catalysed this trait in you?
No, I wasn't. I was a shy little thing. It's funny, people say to me, "Oh, I was at school with you," and I wouldn't have. No one would have known me at school, really. I wasn't on the debating team. I wasn't a captain, school captain, or anything. I was quite a shy, not particularly outgoing person. I had a lovely time at school, but I don't think people remember me from my school days. They just happened to know I was there at the same time. And the same at university. I wasn't active, remotely active in any public sphere. I just, I was quite studious. I put my head down, worked hard. And it was this sort of the fact that I fell into this area of sex where, I mean, it's, as I said, it's something that came very naturally to me, and I was good at it mainly because, I was totally comfortable talking about sex. And I put that down to my mother. I had a wonderful mother who was rather renowned for being very relaxed about sex. My father used to say when they'd go out to dinner parties or something, they'd come home and she would know everything about the man she was sitting next to. She was extremely good at getting them to tell him all about his personal life and his sex life. And she would import, it was at those days we had very strict censorship laws, and books like Lady Chatterley's Lover were banned in Australia. And she would get someone to sneak them into the country, and she'd wrap them up in brown paper so that everybody who came into the house didn't necessarily see what she was reading. And, of course, it meant that the aunt children knew exactly where to go for our sex education. So, having had that background of a mum who was pretty comfortable with all this stuff, I think that made it very easy for me.
Yes.
And so how did I get into that? The sex was, I think had that sort of explanation of a sort of natural fit, if you like. But the male issue was just utter indignation on my part about this isn't fair. Why can't we talk about men? Why do only women matter? Look what's happening. Look, we're in Australia now. We have 6 of the 8 people who kill themselves every day are male. And we have a national suicide policy that is gender neutral, that doesn't mention men as a target group. And I regard that as totally outrageous. And I've been fighting that for 30 years. And yet nothing changes. And I could give you dozens of areas of gross inequity when it comes to treatment of men and women. I had a wonderful time a few years ago out on our campuses because I discovered that our universities were setting up kangaroo courts to make universities took it upon themselves to set up courts to adjudicate sexual assault on our campuses, with putting these boys on trial, no lawyers, no normal legal protections. The universities had the right to throw those boys out of university based on their decisions, take their degrees, remove their degrees that they've paid hundreds of thousands of dollars for sometimes. And it's still going on. And I did this tour of the university saying, what is going on here? How are we allowing this? And, the students, the feminists, went bananas. And there was one university, Sydney University, they had to bring in the riot squad to protect my audience. Gosh. Because of the crazy students trying to stop me being allowed to speak. Now, get that? Trying to stop me being allowed to speak at a university about this question of injustice. And, so I've been out there for decades now, fighting an increasingly lonely fight, because Australia is a country where all our major institutions are now controlled by feminists who are determined to not allow certain conversations, who are determined to not allow conversations about the fact that mainly men are killing themselves, or the fact that it's boys now. I mean, I was so excited in the beginning when girls started to do really well in school. This was fantastic. Girls being taught that they could. No, of course, girls can be good at science and maths, and we have to do special programs to help them realise that. And, so I was very excited at the initial efforts to improve girls' education. But then it was a funny story. People started to write to me saying, mums and dads writing to me saying, look, I go to my school's speech night and it's only girls winning prizes. What is going on with the boys? My son is, dropping out from school. My son is in a remedial class. It's only boys who are in the remedial class. We're seeing this growing gap. So I went to I was writing for one of the newspapers, and I went to a senior bureaucrat and said, this gap is widening, and tell me what you're going to do if it gets further and further, if boys drop further and further apart behind girls. And she said, we'll wait 2,000 years and analyse the results very, very carefully. And then she gave this great laugh. Oh, it's only a joke. It's not a joke. That was 20 years ago she said that to me. And boys are doing worse and worse compared to girls. And no one cares officially. Yeah. Parents care. Boys care. The future women who are looking for men will care when they find that, we've only got we've now got 60% of girls in our graduating from university. A lot of those women are going to want well-educated men. They're not going to find them. Yeah. Because the disparity between male and female educational achievement is growing all the time. We're not allowed to talk about it.
And certainly something to be highlighted. You're making me think. I have a 3-year-old boy. Yeah. And it is what's the path, what's the journey that he's going to go down as well. Why do you, and yourself, I think, feel that you've wanted to continue to champion these topics, if you will? Because you equally could have gone, do you know what, I'm ready to just retire and relax. But you're obviously very passionate about these topics. And is that because you feel it's almost the more people try to quieten the topic, that actually fuels you to continue to speak about it?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I keep getting little emails from people asking me about my legacy, and that they, what is going to happen to what I now call the Arndt Army. This year announced that we could, I got a lot of my volunteers. People always write and say, what can we do? And I say, okay, people, it's now over to you. I'm setting up different groups to tackle different topics, and I want a whole lot of other people to start working on things that I've been working on for years. Because I can see I will be doing all this from my nursing home. But something, it has to evolve in some way. Funnily enough, the more my enemies, and I do say enemies, there are people who have been increasingly determined to shut me down. And the more they attack me publicly, of course, the more people who are attracted to what I do. And a few years ago, I had this incredible situation where I got an award from the government, an honours award for my work for men. And, when they were working out the language they should use to describe this, we came up with, for my work, supporting gender equity through advocacy for men. And I knew that would be a red flag to the bulls when it came to the feminists. And they went bananas. And, as soon as the award was out, they just piled on. I mean, it was very flattering in a sense that it showed how significant I was. Was clearly over the target. The fact that they wheeled out 2 Attorney General to condemn me getting this award, and they demanded my award be rescinded, and they lied to the Senate of Australia, one of our Houses of Parliament, and misread and misinterpreted something I'd said and got them to vote to condemn me. I mean, they just wheeled out all the big guns to attack me, and the people who run the Government House, who organised this award, said they've never seen anything like it. They were getting thousands of letters abusing me and thousands of letters supporting me. But I mean, what the feminists did was took all sorts of things I've written about over my 50-year career in the media, took little bits of videos, cut them out, distorted them. The internet is full of crap about me, full of misleading, distorting information. If people are really interested in this whole hullabaloo, I've got it on my website, the truth about all of this. But, they took over my wiki page. It's been this ongoing battle trying to get some balance again in the way my legacy is going to be. It's really, it was terribly upsetting at the time, and my children got enormously concerned about it, and they would love me to be sitting here having bridge lessons and
yeah, they're like, Mum, when you're going to just slow down?
with me later. And look, it's upsetting for them because most of their friends are captured by this narrative of girls are the victims. There's no issue with boys. There's no problem with fair treatment for males, because you never hear it. And the whole younger generation, particularly women, have been utterly indoctrinated into thinking of themselves as victims. That just makes me so hopping mad. I embraced feminism because it was about women standing on their own 2 feet and taking control and enjoying their independence.
Yes. And you touched on there some of that media scrutiny. How have you managed that? And what advice would you give to someone who, in developing resilience against public criticism?
Don't expect to be liked. No, you have to have a very thick skin. And again, if you're picking on something is that people who control our media are not going to like, you just have to expect utterly malicious treatment. And the fact that there's no playing fair, they will do everything they can to destroy you. I'll add something to that. Never apologise. The people who get criticised for something publicly and then they grovel and say, I didn't really mean it. There's blood in the water. They'll be after you then. You absolutely have to stand up for your principles. And if you don't feel you've done anything wrong, as I certainly didn't when I came under attack, you don't apologise, and you stick to your guns, and you get to know who your friends are, and you will attract people who support your views and support and admire you for standing up for your principles.
Yeah, and gosh, I personally obviously not been on that journey myself, and I feel there's a lot of hard lessons someone would need to go through. And, we see it time and time again, whether it's various topics in the media, both Australia and the UK. I'm dual citizen, so see it from both sides. And whether it's a famous person or an entrepreneur person or someone, and they get absolutely torn to shreds in the media and the front page. And sometimes they don't have much of a story, but they've done it to create the headlines, etc. Yeah. Can you remember when that first time that you came across that criticism? And, obviously now you've got the experience and the knowledge to sort of confidently, shall we say, ignore it and move past it. But I imagine for someone in that first time it happens, you would be like, oh my goodness, and just want to hide under the duvet and never leave the house again.
I've been doing it for so long. When I was out there talking about sex, I, of course, attracted a whole bunch of very different sort of critics. There was this professor at Sydney University who was terribly upset that I was teaching a course on sexual counselling to the medical students, who included her daughter. And, she thought it was appalling, the sort of topics I was talking about, masturbation, and, intimate parts of people's bodies or whatever it was. And, I had enormous numbers of people attacking me publicly. And I was only 22, 23. I was a baby, So I did get used to it very quickly. But then I was, I had this fire within me. I was really evangelistic about the fact that what I was doing was utterly appropriate. People needed to know about sex. People's lives were being damaged through ignorance about sex. People's lives were being damaged because of doctors knowing nothing about sex. I needed to do this work. Doctors needed to have this information. So I was able to brush it off. And I think I've had that all along. I have no doubt that I'm on the right side of history, and that we will look back at this era and say, how in the hell did it happen? How did we let our society become so distorted and so unfair to one gender?
And on so many topics, I imagine, as well. What will, be in the history books? And as a parent and grandmother yourself, what lessons do you hope that you have passed on to the younger generation in your family?
Oh, I'm a very well-behaved grandmother. I don't talk about any of this stuff to my grandchildren, just subtly occasionally, but I have to be careful. I don't think they can avoid knowing that I have a certain public reputation and that I'm not hesitant to. I don't hold back. I mean, even in situations where someone's being unfairly treated in everyday life, I'd be in there having a go, trying to look after people and trying to right the wrong. All my children are very assertive, and they do stand up for themselves and stand up for other. I hope stand up for other people, and they've certainly learnt that. But also, it's about being curious and wanting to learn things and wanting to know the truth and being brave. I mean, I think qualities that apply equally to men and women and boys and girls. And you don't want to shut yourself off from the world, and you need to ask lots of questions. And my grandchildren, of course, all gorgeous little creatures who constantly wanting to know how things work and why things happen. And it's a great shame if we lose that.
Yeah, I see it many times, as I said with my own son, what you can learn through their eyes and be reminded about for being curious and just giving things a go. And I see when my little son goes to, jump off things. He doesn't have all of this overthinking and perhaps fear and critiquing himself. He's just doing it, and he's just off and loving it and being in the moment.
Yeah, and I suppose particularly for boys. I look back on my raising my sons, and I gave them a very long leash, and I think I always had this notion that, that particularly for boys, I mean, it's true of girls too, but particularly for boys, they need to learn to test their physical strength and to take risks, and to raise them in too feminized a world is a huge shame. I mean, we used to have this park near me which had this rocket in it, big, huge, rickety rocket. And no doubt various children fell off and broke an arm or whatever. In today's world, it was taken down, and you're not allowed things that are called, risky. But, I grew up climbing trees, and I had two older brothers. And I very much let my kids do things that some of the other mums won't do, who were busily cotton wooling their boys. They would never let them do it. I remember sitting on a beach with two of my friends who were luckily, these kids were all third children. So we all had been, we were a bit more relaxed about child rearing, and they were surfing, these 10-year-old boys. And we all sat there. We used to sit on the beach watching them. One day we turned to each other and said, we couldn't begin to rescue them. We could barely even see them, let alone rescue. What are we doing sitting here? So we gradually leave them there for an hour and then come back again. And other mothers thought this was outrageous. But, in the end, I'm a great believer in letting my boys be brave. And, they're going to spend their lives in suits, a lot of them. And they need that outlet for the wonderful physicality that defines masculinity.
That's brilliant. That's just great to get an insight into that personal world. The last question I will ask you before we move on to some of our really good conversation cards, thinking of your own children, when they were adolescents, did they come to you for the sex education, the sex advice?
Well, of course I did. Well, I couldn't avoid it, the poor things.
Yeah, this is what I'm thinking. I mean, at school, I think we had one lesson. I think we might have had one lesson, and it was putting a condom on a banana or something, and that was the end of it.
No, it wasn't about lessons. It was about, I'd watch TV with them, and I'd say, "What do you think about that?" And when they were teenagers, and I would raise topics with them. I embarrassed them profusely. But also, I had this amazing library when I was at that period of my life, because I'd collected, sex education books for years and years and years. And I used to notice if we went out when I had teenagers, if we went out anywhere, I'd come back, I'd see all the books had been rearranged. Oh. And my daughter tells me that as soon as they'd gone out, all the kids would come over. But it also worked, it was very sad. I'd have girls who were worried about being pregnant and would come to me wondering about the morning after pill. But they couldn't talk to their mums. And that was in the 80s, 90s. And I don't think things have got particularly better. I mean, in terms of sex education, there was a golden era in the sort of, I suppose, late 70s, where everything started to open up, the sexual revolution, the women's movement, this whole idea that this was something we should be talking about. We've gone backwards. I had a talk-back sex education program at 6:00 on a Saturday night on 2GB, one of our biggest commercial radio stations, and busloads of cricketers would sit outside in their buses, not wanting to go in after the match was over, listening to my show, talking about ejaculation, talking about whatever, and it was, I talked about anything that people rang in about. You would never be allowed to do that now.
Thank you so much for sharing just such an insight into your career, your journey, some of your motivations and what has inspired you and driven you over these years. It really is fascinating to hear. So, as I said, I always like to pull out a few cards for our guests to take them on a completely different tangent to their usual topics that they talk about. I'll ask you 3 questions from our cards. So, question number 1. Who has had the biggest influence on your life?
Oh, I'd have to say my parents. I've talked about my mother, but my father was also an extraordinary man who was very much, he was an economist, famous economist, but he was also very much a public intellectual who loved to get in there and be part of the public debate. And he was always in trouble with my mother because he'd write letters to the newspapers about things that annoyed her. They ended up on very different ends of the political spectrum. So he became more and more conservative. But yeah, he always had to go, and he was not afraid to stick his neck out over unpopular causes. So that was an inspiration to me.
Yeah, well, just as you're saying that, clearly this is where some of your traits and sparks has come from. Absolutely. Question number 2. What was your biggest highlight from last year?
Oh, I had a fantastic year. We put together a conference, which is, thank you. I did that when I was 22. I put together a conference last year, and that's it. I should have known never to do it again. It's such a lot of work. But we put a conference together on restoring the presumption of innocence. And we had people from all over Australia, law professors and doctors and, victims of Me Too attacks. And I mean, all people came from all over Australia to this conference to talk about what's happening in our justice system. And it was just spectacular. It's all up on my YouTube if you want to have a look at that.
Gosh, well, you're certainly not slowing down, are you, Bettina? Organising conferences instead of relaxing at home. Question number 3. What is the secret to a happy life?
I'd probably say children. I mean, I never had any doubt, if I look back on my life, that the most important thing in my life has been my children. and grandchildren now. They're the greatest joy. And I remember when my daughter was at school, I was invited to her school to talk about, they had a careers person come along. And so they'd invite prominent professionals of all sorts to expose the girls to different areas. And I was, of course, supposed to be talking about journalism. And much to the surprise of the person who'd organised it, I ended up talking a lot to these girls about don't forget to have babies. And that's the message no one talks to girls about anymore. That's the most, obviously there are people who can't have children, who people who choose not to have children, who can have perfectly happy lives. But I think children are the ultimate, I'd say, adventure in a sense, because they can bring you the greatest sorrow, of course, if something goes wrong. But also the peaks of joy and contentment and utter, thrill of watching these gorgeous creatures that you gave birth to grow into adults. Just amazing. And then I'm now having the grandchildren, having my daughter had a baby. It's just an extraordinary thing, the generations and seeing being able to also pass down your insights into what you've learned about being a mum. And, with a daughter who, it's brought us so close together, her having a baby, and it's been incredibly exciting for me. So,
that's beautiful.
Children are just the peak of our existence, in my view.
Yeah, and you forget. I was of the era where you're jumping into the work, the career, what's the plan, and you're just thinking, I'll think about the children down the line.
Sorry, Amy, I was just going to say, one of the things women used to know about life was that men turned around on their deathbeds, this was the classic story, and regretted the time that they didn't spend with their families and children and so on. I shouldn't have spent so much time at the office. That was the classic story. And women knew that about life. And what do? They bought into this total rubbish idea that careers were going to do it for them. And they were misled, I think, by the feminist movement into thinking that was the most important thing, and that this career was going to be the highlight of their life. And how many women do you know have turned around at 40 or 50 and thought, my God, I missed out. I missed out on relationships. I missed out on marriage. I missed out on children. An utter tragedy. Yeah. And we don't talk enough about this issue.
Absolutely. And they're all great answers, great responses. Thank you so much for that. And the finishing question that I like to ask all of our guests is, if you could ask any person, dead or alive, a question, who would it be and what would you ask them?
I was thinking about this issue. Well, I have to say Julia Gillard, our first female Prime Minister, which was terribly exciting, of course. And I was really pleased when she first became Prime Minister, because she announced that she wasn't going to play the gender card. She wasn't going to go in for the fact that I'm special because I'm a woman. And what did she do? She got into a total mess. She was running into major political problems, and she turned around in Parliament and gave her misogyny speech. She attacked Tony Abbott with a whole bunch of lies about what a misogynist creep he was. And she sold out and played the gender card, and she became a feminist heroine. So I'd like to ask her, does she ever have any remorse about selling out her principles?
Fascinating question. Brilliant. It's been a really interesting, a very different conversation today. And I think hopefully it's given our listeners something different to think about, or perhaps some topics they aren't aware of and have never really considered, and also gives somebody a real insight into your career and really what it takes to be obviously someone who is in that public domain and talking about and standing up for issues they are passionate about. So thank you. How can our listeners connect with you, find out more about you? You are quite active still online, so where can people check out more information?
Probably the easiest thing to do is just look up our name, Bettina Arndt. I have a website which has a lot of information, but I'm mainly blogging on Substack. which is great joy, lovely. I do it about once a fortnight, and I have researchers helping me dig deep into all sorts of topics that we don't normally have much information about. And also I do YouTube videos. And as you say, I've had videos that have had 1.5 million views, really big numbers. YouTube does its best, of course, to bury me now, as they do. But yeah, so you can just look for my name in those various places and you'll find me.
Perfect. I'll include some links in the show notes. So brilliant. Thank you so much again for your time today.
Amy, nice to talk to you.
Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed the episode. Be sure to check out the show notes for more information on today's guests. And if really good conversations are your thing, hit subscribe and join us next time for more business journeys, insights and banter.